Good afternoon from Singapore. I'm Lavinia from the Reuters APAC marketing team. So welcome to the 10th workshop in this series, Academic Libraries Reimagined, which is a digital space created to foster knowledge sharing and networking within the librarian community. The workshop happens every 4 months and is open to any library professionals who are interested in the topics being presented. Before we get started, there are a couple of house rules for the session. Video and audio have been muted for all attendees. For any questions you may have, please type them into the chat box. If time runs out before all questions are attended to, we will contact you after the event. Likewise, feel free to drop us a line if there are other questions that you may have after the session. This session is around 60 minutes long, including the question and answer, and it will be recorded. The recordings, PowerPoint slides, and the speaker's contact details will be shared with everyone after the event. So we have with us today Rachel from University of Adelaide. She leads a team of liaison librarians who support staff and student researchers in information discovery, research data management, publishing outputs, and identifying research impact metrics. And we also welcome our speaker, Roxanne, back to the ALR series. Roxanne, who is responsible for the Australian National University Libraries. She has a long career in libraries and IT, focused on the development of digital delivery and digital services. Now, on to the big topic of the day, navigating the open access landscape with confidence. With one of the core missions of libraries being able to provide equitable access to information in perpetuity, this movement fits nicely with that mission. So it makes sense for libraries to support and advocate for open access. Especially for Asia-Pac regions, adopting open access will give researchers global visibility and lead to more citations from other countries. Open access also helps to developing countries' librarians to build their collections. So while the perfect model has yet to present itself, libraries have been working diligently to support this initiative over the years and have a vested interest in free access to information. So in a second, we will hear from our two invited speakers on their perspective and examples on how their libraries have worked to support open access. So with that, I will now hand it over to Rachel for the first presentation.
Thank you so much, Lavinia, for that lovely introduction. Just bear with me a second. I'm just going to bring my my slides up. Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to pop my video off just while I'm speaking, just to preserve my bandwidth. So thanks for joining us today. I'm really pleased to be able to share with you what we're doing at the University of Adelaide Library to support open access in the university. So I'm going to start by acknowledging and paying my respects to the Kaurna people, who are the traditional custodians whose ancestral lands I am lucky enough to live, work and play on, and to be speaking to you from today. So acknowledging the deep feelings of attachment and relationship of the Kaurna people to country, acknowledging that this land is unceded. So to introduce open access at the University of Adelaide, so like a lot of universities, I imagine, we do have an open access policy. So the University of Adelaide is part of what's called the Group of 8 universities in Australia. It means it's a very research intensive university. So open access is really important. It's really important to have a policy. So the library contributed to writing this, but it's not a library policy, it's a university policy, and we do have a big role to play in communicating it and helping our researchers to meet their requirements underneath it. So there is a link on the slides, but I'll just give you the highlights, the main features of the university's policy, just to give you an idea of what our researchers are working with. So either green or gold routes to OA are considered acceptable. Just to give a very quick explanation for anyone who's not too sure about the colours, green means where the route where you upload your author accepted manuscript to a repository. So in our case, it's the institutional repository called Adelaide Research and Scholarship. or the gold route is acceptable, and that's where you publish directly on the journal webpage, the publisher's webpage, either in an open access journal or a journal that offers those open access options. And usually there's a fee involved, an article processing charge. The policy recommends that the open license that should be used is the CC-BY license. And it mandates the deposit of certain research outputs from researchers at the University of Adelaide in that institutional repository. So things like journal articles, book chapters, they must be deposited, and they are encouraged to deposit other research outputs as well. And the policy encourages our authors to avoid embargoes on the full text of their outputs for more than 12 months. But importantly, the policy also notes that funder requirements take priority over the university policy. So, for example, we have a lot of researchers who have funding from the National Health and Medical Research Council, the NHMRC in Australia. They are a major funder in Australia, and they have their own open access policy that mandates that researchers must publish their research outputs funded by them open access immediately. So in that case, the funder requirements would take priority over the university policy. So as I said, the library does a lot to support open access in the university. So I've mentioned the institutional repository, Adelaide Research and Scholarship, and that's managed by the library digital access team. The library also provides access to 19 read and publish agreements. So these are transformative agreements which allow University of Adelaide researchers to publish open access via the gold route in certain journals included in these agreements from certain publishers without having to pay the article processing charge themselves. That is covered in the agreement that we pay for. We also do a lot of work in supporting our researchers in understanding open access publishing and really promoting the options that they have. So my team is the research and engagement team. So it's myself and 5 liaison librarians who support the various faculties and schools across the university. And we do a lot of work in this area. And in fact, it's an objective on our library's operational plan to deliver an open access engagement program, and that's what we do. It's also important to note here that I've included the read and publish agreements, the transformative agreements, as something that we do as support for open access, but we never present it as being, the preferred option. It's another option that can help our researchers. We make sure that they understand that it's not, the only option for publishing open access, and we help them understand all of their options and emphasize that they should choose the one that is best for their work. And in the library, we also have a copyright coordinator who can answer those tricky copyright and licensing queries within open access publishing as well. I just thought I'd note as well what the library does not do. So we often get the question about who can pay article processing charges, whether the library can pay for someone to publish in a certain journal. And if it's not something that's included in the read and publish agreements, then the answer is no, unfortunately not. And we don't have the funding for it. And as far as we know, there isn't a central fund in the university either. So the advice we normally give here is that if they're being funded, their funder might allow or even expect them to be using some of their funding to pay for publishing. And they could check their guidelines. Otherwise, they can ask within their schools. But to be totally honest, we're not sure whether any schools have policies around paying for publishing, if there's anybody who does do that or not. I've alluded to this already, but we do not tell people where to publish. We are just presenting the options, offering support for complying with the university policy, with funder policies, resources to help researchers understand what's available. We don't preference one route over another, and we don't tell anyone what option they should pick. It's always up to the author to decide what they're going to do. And we're not involved in any in-house publishing, so there's not a university press and the library doesn't publish any journals. So as I've said, my team does a lot of support and training for open access. So in the library, we have a research support framework, which shows how we will support researchers in discovering information, managing their data, and also publishing. And one point specifically mentions OA. So we support them in publishing their research open access by complying with those funder requirements in the university policy, and then providing these resources and this training on giving them ideas on the various options available, including those read and publish transformative agreements. So something that we do a lot of is workshops. So my team of liaison librarians delivers a whole program of library research support workshops. It's a rolling program throughout the year. We do them all online via Zoom. We find that encourages attendance, and we find that people will often register even if they can't make it because they'll get the recording. We usually have 2 librarians delivering, someone on chat. All of our material is shared with each other, so anyone can pick up the workshop that someone else did last time. And the topics for our workshops include several to do with open access. So we do one that's about publishing open access. So that's an introduction to OA and an introduction to the various options available. And we deliver that jointly with the copyright coordinator, who very helpfully does a section of it on the copyright and licensing things that play into open access publishing. Every few months, we do a 30-minute webinar on the read and publish agreements just to introduce them and make sure people know that they're available and how they work. And we also run a workshop called Introduction to Strategic Journal Publishing, and that includes a big section on open access because, of course, that's an important part of strategic publishing as well. These are very successful. We get good feedback, we get good attendance. I just looked at some of the numbers to give you an idea. So back in March, we ran our Publishing OA workshop and we had 112 people sign up and 67 attend. So that's pretty standard. So as I said, a lot of people will have signed up just to get the recordings. They couldn't make it at the time. Researchers can also book a one-to-one consult with the liaison librarians, but we do try and not present that as the default option because we're a small team, so we can't see everybody one-to-one. So we do make sure we're promoting these workshops that we do and our web pages as well. So we do have a lot of resources where people can get the help they need without necessarily having to come and see us one-on-one. So the web pages are another option for people to find information and get some guidance. So we have a section on our library web pages that's about strategic publishing, and there's a whole page there about publishing open access. I've just pulled some screenshots there. The web pages are publicly available if you want to have a look, but just to show you the kind of things that we have on there. So a brief introduction to the different types of open access, some guidance on choosing an OA license, rights retention, grant funding, and where to get more help. So we redid these web pages last year, and we really try to shape them around the flow of the publishing journey. So from that point of looking at where to publish through to actually, applying the license and that kind of thing. And we continue to update these as we get feedback or if we realize we're not showing something that we should be showing. My team also does a lot of outreach, so communications and promotion of open access options and open access resources. So I've just got a few examples here that I wanted to share with you. So something we did earlier this year was some targeted communication. So I mentioned the NHMRC a little earlier, the National Health and Medical Research Council. They're a big funder in Australia. And they've recently updated their open access policy to mandate that grant holders must publish their outputs immediately open access. So in March of this year, we decided to actually try and do a targeted communication to people who were holding these grants, just to make sure they're aware that the policy had changed and to let them know that we can help them. So we went ahead and got a list of current grant holders from the Research Services Department, and we sent that email out to them. And we received a really good level of response to the email. That open access workshop in March that I just mentioned was happening a couple of weeks after the email went out, and we had quite a lot of people sign up for that workshop just to make sure they understand the open access options. We had people sending in email queries, booking in one-to-ones with their librarian, and several extended invitations to their liaison librarians to come to school or faculty meetings to reiterate the messaging and answer any questions that people had. We did have some challenges. So some researchers interpreted the email as us having checked them for compliance and found them not compliant, which was not what we did at all. We don't have the resources to check people's compliance. We just sent it out to everybody holding an NHMRC grant. As often happens, because we're so helpful in the library, we started getting a lot of questions about the grants that were nothing to do with us. So we had to sort of send those questions off to the Research Services Department. And obviously there's a workload impact when we get this flurry of requests for help, people wanting one-to-ones. So we'll think about how to address these things next time we do it. But we found it a positive experience for getting that information out to researchers to ensure that they're being compliant. So we will look to do this once a year to make sure that we're keeping that messaging going. A few other things that we've got, we have something called a read and publish journal selector tool. So I'm not going to say too much about this because some of my colleagues are actually going to be delivering a presentation at VALA in July in Melbourne on this. So if you are going to VALA and you're interested, please do go and see their presentation. The short version is that our library systems team developed a web tool. It's behind a login, it's not publicly available. So University of Adelaide researchers can log in and search by title or subject area keywords for journals that are included in our read and publish transformative agreement. So journals where they could publish without needing to pay the article processing charge themselves for open access. And in search results as well, there's an indication of like Clarivate and Scimago rankings, so Q1, Q2, and a link to a web page with full information about the agreements. So again, we're careful with how we promote, communicate this tool. We're not saying this is what you should use to find somewhere to publish. We're saying if you want to explore the read and publish agreements, this is a tool that you can use. It's another way to assess some of your options when publishing open access. And then we have attendance at school and faculty meetings, announcements in newsletters, bulletins, direct communications to key stakeholders in schools, all stuff that the librarians do. And they will communicate things like new read and publish agreements, when we've got workshops coming up, any updates like the NHMRC funder open access policy change. So we do have these constant kind of lines of communication and promotion for open access support as well. And then for International Open Access Week in October, we are planning a little program of events, which is very exciting. So we're looking forward to getting that into place as well. And I think that will be a great way to engage our research community further in open access. So I thought after sharing what we do, I'd just highlight some of the challenges that we experience when supporting open access at the University of Adelaide. A lack of awareness of the OA policy in the university is a big thing. So last year when it was updated, my team did the communications about it, and we found there was a real lack of awareness in some areas, like they'd not actually understood previous version of the policy. So for example, there's some subject areas like maths and computer science where there's an established culture of uploading preprints to the preprint server archive. And some of them thought that that made them compliant with the policy. They didn't realize that they had to go one step further and put their final manuscript into the institutional repository. In some cases, they seemed just totally unaware that there ever was a policy. We definitely got the impression sometimes that they thought it was a library thing that we were imposing on them. And some of the comments we received also suggested that some researchers were viewing putting their manuscript in the institutional repository as somewhat of an administrative burden, just something else that the university was making them do. And we know that researchers are busy, time poor, they're under pressure. So how do we help them understand why they're being asked to do this, like why it's important? So part of our reasoning for that targeted comms campaign we did to the NHMRC grant holders was that targeted outreach might be more effective, which it was. But, the university policy applies to all the researchers, staff and student researchers here. That's a large number of people. And we still need to figure out how we can really communicate that effectively. So we cover it in our open access workshop, but we're still always thinking of different ways to do that as well. Again, there's a lot of misunderstanding amongst researchers about what open access is, which is understandable. It's a very complex landscape, as the title of this session implies. We often get, for example, researchers kind of seeing the read and publish transformative agreements as being the totality of open access, like that's their only option. So there are a lot of misunderstandings coming out there. Another challenge is around OA books, monographs, chapters. So we have researchers, particularly in the arts and humanities, who do ask us about publishing a book or a book chapter open access, either because they want to, they don't understand the benefits, or they have funding from a funder who wants them to make every effort to do so. And I imagine this is something in common with a lot of university libraries. We find this difficult to advise on because in comparison to the journals, which are a lot further ahead with open access, there are so few options. And we do ensure we stay up to date with developments and resources, but it can still be tricky to help them understand the complexity of the environment. So, for example, every so often we get a researcher who's seen that we have a read and publish agreement with Taylor and Francis and assumes that they can publish their book chapter under that. They don't understand that it's just for journals. And sometimes people get confused by between an open access book and an OER, open educational resource, which is something else we also support, and they don't quite understand that that can't be something where they can publish their output in a book form as well. So that one's really tricky. And then overall, we have this kind of balance that we have to work with. We want to be contributing to rankings performance and helping our researchers to do so. But then there's an equity issue around open access options with those what you might call premium journal titles potentially as well. So as I said already, we don't tell people where to publish. We help them to understand their options. But there are these clashing priorities. Research-intensive universities like ours are pushing for that traditional high research impact, wanting to stay on top in the rankings. And we know for a fact that some schools tell their researchers that they must be publishing in Q1 journals, those very high impact journals. And then at the same time, the researchers have their funder policies, the university policy to comply with. And then many of those Q1 journals charge article processing charges for making it gold open access, and they place long embargoes on putting a manuscript in the repository. So then there's a cost involved if it's not covered by read and publish, which often it's not. And so that potentially becomes an equity issue. And there's this whole issue around, what OA aspires to be or what it hoped to be versus the current reality. Again, potential barriers for certain people in actually being able to publish open access. It's something that we're constantly staying on top of, but it is a constant kind of very murky environment sometimes to be working in. And as I said, we don't tell people where to publish, but I think I do speak for my team as well when I say we do feel that we have a responsibility to advocate for ethical and equitable open access. And that's really, really tricky to manage sometimes. And that's the first question I've put on my final slide, which I'm going to end on. So here's some of the questions we grapple with. If anybody has the answers, I'd love to hear them. If anyone's got any thoughts around these, I'd love to hear them as well. So there's that tricky issue of how do we balance supporting the contribution to rankings performance with supporting equitable open access. That issue of how do we promote and communicate the read and publish transformative agreements in ways that will not be interpreted by researchers as suggesting that that is open access. And then that issue I mentioned earlier, how do we best support our researchers to understand why they should be putting things in the institutional repository and to see it as something positive rather than just that administrative burden that they've been asked to do. So I'm going to end there. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. And I'm going to hand over to Roxanne now.
Thank you. Thank you to De Gruyter for organising these sessions. They have been a wonderful contribution to libraries across the world and have let us engage and think about a whole range of different things. And that's what I got out of Rachel as well. So to start, I'd like to say Yuma from Canberra, the land of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. I begin by acknowledging that I am on the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people and that many of you will be on different Indigenous lands. I pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that many of the stories of Indigenous people within our universities have been trapped before. So again, I acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the land of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people and pay my respects to elders past and present and recognise that many of the stories that have been hidden through a lack of open access have been the stories of Indigenous peoples. So the open access landscape, and one of the reasons why I'm so enthusiastic about this session, is very complex, and Rachel has beautifully articulated a range of different strategies that we're learning how to use, and there are many skills that we need in order to do this. And the focus of my presentation will be on what are the skills that we need in order to deliver. So I wanted to start off just reminding us of the now more than a decade old Budapest Open Access Initiative statement that OA is not an end in itself, but it's a means to an end. Above all, it's a means to the equity, quality, usability and sustainability of research. This really says to us that there are community obligations and institutional obligations that we have for our universities. And yet for our academics, there are a complex range of issues that they perceive, as Rachel has outlined, in terms of what is their motivation, how can they work within their disabilities, within their disciplines, how can they work within the connections that they make, how can they put the data and the publications together, and the scholarly ecosystem to them often looks remarkably confusing. Sometimes it looks like that to us as well. So open access sits within a framework of open science, using science to include social science and the humanities. We in libraries are very engaged in the scientific publications, so the green open perspective of this, but increasingly we're adding open data, open science infrastructures, where we're engaged with the collection of material from the community that is preserved in a science infrastructure. We're engaged with dialogue with other knowledge systems, with local communities, with Indigenous peoples, and we're also engaged with a range of societal actors as we seek both to provide an infrastructure that suits our university and the funders, but also suits the communities that are the stakeholders or the beneficiaries of the research that is done within our universities. This is the librarian's view of the complexity. So the map was really the scholar's view. And you can see here we have many, many different elements that we provide: catalogues, databases, different types of entities that we aim to make discoverable to our clients, but also to assist their participation in the scholarly ecosystem with. And it's got no less complex over time. In fact, I think there's a strong argument that it's got more complex. So our vision is really that academic content will be freely available online. It will fulfill those societal expectations. It will fulfill the objectives of the university, which include, as Rachel has referred to, rankings and university rankings. Less than 20% of the university's rankings are due to research and research outputs. But if we can make a contribution in that way, it's an important contribution. It's been a long evolution in Australia, and I'd really like to congratulate the Open Access Australasia for putting together this map, where we started with policies and repositories, and we've really moved to integrated environments, which still have quite a lot to do, but ones that require a new set of skills that are not so much about creating the policies and the physical things, but engaging with publishers, engaging with researchers, engaging with funders, which takes a whole new range of attributes in libraries and a whole new framework of areas in which we will engage. In Australia, our first, and I'm going to just use the theme of, for those of you who are Australians, Do the Five, which is a campaign for water safety, and says, you know, there are 5 principles in order to keep particularly children safe in the water, and we should adopt that. My argument is that there are 5 different ways that we make open access resources available, and they require probably more than 5 different skill sets. And we've demonstrated the ability to grow these skill sets, but there are some areas that we still have a lot of work to do. So the first is open access repositories. So we began our first journey into open access by putting copies of journal articles, copies of theses, copies of other material into our repositories. And what we've found in the past 20 years is that the material that is most heavily used in the repositories are not journal articles, but are theses. So we, like a number of universities, have digitised every thesis that the university has ever passed, every PhD thesis and a number of master's theses. And we find that almost 80% of the downloads from our repository, which in the research collection has around 130,000 items, but there are only less than 15,000 theses, but that is where the majority of use is. And that says something about the importance of access to knowledge that we perhaps didn't realise when we were managing physical collections. When we were managing physical collections, the average use of a thesis when it was sitting in our print repository was 0. In the digital age, the average use of a digital thesis every year, we were really excited when it moved from 3 to 12 to 15 to 40, and we now have an average of hundreds of downloads for each thesis on average every year, which is remarkable. In terms of our approach to scholarship that we have within our repositories, many of us are now taking the view that we don't need to have copies of journal articles. If the journal articles are open access and out there, what we've got to do is think about a discovery layer that sits across or above, and how do we make that information by working collaboratively with the publishers accessible, whether it's our single federated search systems. We have yet to really tackle a national system in Australia, or whether it is, as our customers refer to it, Dr. Google. So just a bit more on our repositories. I've done 2 graphs here of the use from all Australian university institutional repositories, and you can see that the content, which is on the upper right, has grown dramatically during the 20 years that it's been measured, but most significantly, in fact, post-COVID. In terms of the usage, we saw a really significant increase around 2014, which then fell slightly, but has steadily grown. And in 2022, again in the time of COVID, we saw quite a significant increase. So in terms of the reach, in terms of thinking about how we put these collections together, how we promote these collections, how we connect them to the ecosystem, because for many of our users and potential users, they don't wake up in the morning and think, I'll go to a university repository. They often think, I will go to my university's search system, I will go to a national search system. So there's a whole lot of new roles here for us in terms of collecting, which I think we've become very sophisticated at, promoting repositories, but again, promoting access to that content, where I think we're probably have quite a lot of thinking yet to go about how does that connect to national and disciplinary discovery services, but connecting to the ecosystem within our single search systems where we're quite sophisticated. The preprints, as Rachel's talked about, is an area where the role of libraries has been generally to know about preprints. So a lot of our authors are publishing in archive, so science, biologists, mathematicians, astronomers, many of the social science and humanities are publishing in or making material available through SSRN. Others are using bioarchive and specialist archives, and quite a lot of the publishers, when authors sign up now, have the ability, whether there's a read and publish license or not, for our authors to be able to make their preprints available through specific archives. That's a really interesting area for us, because what distinguishes us in the university is that we can provide advice across a wide range of contracts, agreements that authors are signing with publishers. We can help them navigate the system if they have accidentally forgotten to advise a publisher that they wanted to put it out into an archive, and copyright is an essential part of that advice. So that's a new role, not about advising where to publish, but advising on the open side in terms of the relationship between the publishers and the relationship with the open archives. So here's a couple of examples of archives, and of course Gates have their own archive and have mandated that anyone who is funded for research will make their research available through an open archive, particularly theirs. The third model in the Do the Five is a model that I think we're pretty strong at in libraries, and I call it the do it yourself or with a friend. So in Australia, we have, through the Council of Australian University Libraries, a collective that is publishing with authorship from the academic sector, open access textbooks. The advantage of that is that we're collaborating around a set of infrastructure so that everyone doesn't have to do their own thing. This allows a sharing of information, allows engagement with authors, and allows us to learn a lot more about the scholarly publishing ecosystem in a way that I think increases our skills significantly. And when we come to questions, I'll be really interested to hear from you about what you think the new skill set is for us to take this publishing role through our libraries. There have been a lot of different challenges, and there's a lot of really valuable case studies on the CALL website. So in addition to this, we have seen an absolutely magnificent partnership between publishers and research libraries. In Australia, the Read and Publish licenses have been a great success. We've only had them for 2 years. We now have hundreds of articles and author publishing fees saved, and libraries have demonstrated 3 different skills really here. I think the negotiation with publishers, partly through collaboration with the Council of Australian University Libraries, so having a consortium that we're dealing with, but also doing a number of deals by themselves by talking with publishers has been really very helpful and has helped us understand the publishing environment and publishers understand our environment. As Rachel said, a lot of work has had to go into informing authors and potential authors about what this new environment looks like. It's a bit challenging because, as my staff constantly tell me, every publishing agreement and process is different. So they need our help to understand what this part of the ecosystem looks like. And then they need quite a lot of advice from us about the details because it is complex and confusing. It also allows us to reframe conversations. So we have been talking not just to individual authors, but we've found it highly valuable to give a presentation or a number of presentations to the University Research Committee, to the Library Advisory Committee, to senior leaders around the university about how we can provide the best opportunities for university research to be communicated to the broadest possible audience. The second part of this is the direct to open, which has been extraordinarily innovative and again, in a couple of years have really revolutionised a small part of the information ecosystem. De Gruyter's direct to open, MIT's direct to open, JSTOR's direct to open really allow us to develop a new and different partnership with publishers, allow us to talk to the academic community, both about the potential for them to be authors in these series and also for them to benefit from it and to collaboratively work on long-term goals. So again, rather than just being a purchaser of resources or making copies of publications available, we're actually part of a fundamental shift that sees us as a partnership trying to assist researchers address the broader goals by offering more knowledgeable alternatives about solutions. And I think these direct to open initiatives are extremely important. And I would strongly recommend, if you haven't looked at De Gruyter's, that you do look at De Gruyter's direct to open option because it's very innovative. The other aspect I think is an interesting one in terms of doing the 5 is to think about how we can engage internationally on this project to open up access to knowledge. So we were really absolutely fascinated to look at, we joined HathiTrust because HathiTrust is a wonderful digital initiative of universities in the United States, started with the Google Book Digitisation project, but expanded to a huge corpus of information that under the Copyright Act in the US, where it is fair use and not fair dealing, they have been able to digitise and make available within America. But the fact that they have digitised that means that if you are able to give permission or get permission, they are able to open up access to a great range of material to users outside the United States. It was extraordinary how many of the Australian National University's collection materials or publications were already digitised and within HathiTrust. My terrific staff compared and searched what we had already digitised, what was in HathiTrust, and because I'm the Copyright Officer at the Australian National University, I was able to give permission to HathiTrust to open up access to thousands of ANU publications dating back to the very early 1960s. And we were able to achieve open access without having to do any digitisation ourselves, without having to do any metadata about the digital object itself. And we were able to share that with others, both through our catalogue and contributing those records to the Australian National Bibliographic Database, but also make them available to people who found it through HathiTrust, whether going there directly or whether using Dr. Google. So it's been very interesting for me to see these 5 different strands and to think about how our skills and capabilities can develop in order to use them effectively for our institutions. With HathiTrust, there was a huge range of traditional library skills which staff in the ANU library were able to use to compare data sets, and anyone can ask HathiTrust for a data set based on any publisher or place. We were then able also to inform our institution, our researchers, that we had made works accessible, and we were able to connect to the ecosystem, not just within Australia, but connect to the international ecosystem through HathiTrust. So it was a different type of thinking, some absolutely brilliant staff using their traditional library skills, and an opportunity to really navigate by thinking differently. So navigation has been my theme through this. So when we're doing the 5 to be really major players in the scholarly ecosystem, we are navigating a new range of skills. We are navigating resources within our institution, resources produced by publishers, resources produced by authors, and resources that have been digitised by others. So there are a lot of stars in the landscape that we're able to connect together and bring end to end into the scholarly ecosystem in an effective way. In the Australian National University, we're also trying to apply a cybernetic lens to say, well, how can the practice that we are seeing bring together understanding of how we need to develop our infrastructure, how we need to connect to the other infrastructure around the scholarly ecosystem, how are we managing the data about that, such as use and ORCID, how are we situating that in the context, particularly of disciplinary-based archive systems, and how do we connect our people and processes in order to produce new sustainable workflows that will be able to be with us through times of changing technology, but also times of changing finances within our universities. Because the more that we can be automated and the more that we can be visible through thinking globally, the better we will be able to deliver solutions for our university, and the better we will be able to improve the scholarly ecosystem. I wanted to end by suggesting that the value that we contribute through these new skills and through these new initiatives has never been more important. The International Alliance of Research Universities, which is a very small group of 11 universities, has a statement about the importance of the knowledge ecosystem. So all of the vice-chancellors, the presidents of places like Yale, Oxford, Cambridge, ANU, 11 universities, one of their 5 priorities is making sure that the knowledge from universities is available in the ecosystem. And as they say, that a fundamental contribution to society by universities lies in creating and passing on knowledge for its own sake and engaging in society with its application. So what we're doing can be highly visible and is recognised within the philosophy of our institutions, which gives it a particular visibility and a value that helps us engage with our community of authors and our community of partners, including publishers. So just to summarise, doing the 5 to stay alive in OA, we have repositories which are in our control. So we've got a lot of skills that have been developed about collecting materials and applying metadata and making those accessible. But for preprints, that's quite a different environment because those materials sit outside the ecosystems that are on it, or the part of the ecosystem that's on our infrastructure. So we really need to think about how we integrate that into our discovery systems and how we understand how we can help our authors be able to participate in that world effectively. We've seen a terrific rise in consortia and innovation by publishers with direct to open that has led to us using our great skills about negotiation, metadata sharing, and traditional library skills. We have publishers creating really new viable options for us, and we have some global solutions that I think we are at a very early stage of maturity about exploring. So that creative urge of libraries, that curiosity about seeking to understand how we can form relationships where material that is not within our infrastructure will be able to make discoverable by thinking about copyright ownership and coming up with solutions, I think will give us some really good practical challenges for developing library skills and recognising the value of our services. So finally, just assessing the future, just 3 final comments. So revisiting our purpose, thinking about that greater achievement to the community, I think is highly valuable. Discovery, I think we've got a lot of challenges there, and I think we're starting to see some fantastic collaboration opportunities rather than just thinking about purchasing of data. So that builds on the skills that we have, but we need to think about how we develop the new skills to work in these different environments. And I end with a picture from Canberra, which is just outside the Chifley Library at ANU, which is a ground map. And the thing I love about this ground map is it was made with particular guidance from the Ngunnawal people. And it talks about connecting different parts of the landscape and building bridges in new and different ways between parts that are inside and parts that are outside our control. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Roxanne and Rachel. Can I please ask you to on your videos as we go into the question and answer segment? We have a lot of questions and comments coming in during the 2 presentations, so let's just dive into it. So the first few questions is towards Rachel. If University of Adelaide wants to move more into the open access publishing sphere,
I don't think that is something that the university would be particularly looking to do. So the library operational plan strategic priorities and objectives, they're all aligned with what the university's objectives are. And there is a lot around research impact and excellence, not just that kind of traditional research impact that I spoke about earlier, but also bringing research impact to industry, to the local area, that kind of thing. So the university has a lot of objectives around there, but I think, the way we continue to support that is just continue what we're doing now, supporting our researchers with creating more impact with open access. So I think it's a case of we carry on what we're doing.
Okay. Pertaining to the read and publish agreements that you mentioned, there are 19 of them. So there's a question whether the contract is usually in the form of providing APC vouchers to the members, and if there is a website where they can see information on the 19 agreements.
Yep, absolutely. So I'm just going to drop the link to the website in the chat. So that's our web pages for those read and publish agreements. How they work is the Council of Australian University Librarians call. They negotiate the agreements with publishers on behalf of the universities, and then the university decide which ones they want to take up. So I'm going to pop a link to the call web pages as well. It's nothing like giving out vouchers. It's all kind of managed through call. It's very much an automated process through the publisher's workflow. If they use their University of Adelaide email address, it will recognise eligibility. And I think there was also a point about whether it's paid for out of subscription, the library subscription budget. Yes, it is. So where we would have previously paid for read access, the traditional access, now in some cases we're paying for that read and publish. But we wouldn't pay, you know, if somebody wanted to publish in a journal that's not included, the library doesn't have the additional budget to pay the charge for that. And I think it's probably because we supply the read and publish agreements that maybe there's a perception that the library pays for publishing, and it's not quite the case. So hopefully the web pages answer a bit of the question, some of the questions. There's an FAQ on there for researchers, which might be useful as well.
Okay. Could you also remind on the presentation that you mentioned that focusing on the read and publish journal selected to? Is that an online or an offline session?
So I mentioned that some of my colleagues are presenting at the VALA conference. I'll just drop a link in there. So it's a conference in Melbourne in Australia in July. The program's just come out. It looks really good. So if anyone is going to that, my colleagues Rebecca and Ben are presenting about some of the strategic publishing work that we do, including the read and publish journal selector tool and how we've promoted it and what kind of feedback we've been getting.
Okay, all right. And also a question about the OA week that was mentioned in one of your slides. Is there more information to that event, because they're interested in innovative approaches on how to publicize their agreements to the researchers?
Yeah, absolutely. So we haven't got anything set in stone yet because it's not till October. But we have been thinking, I'm just posting a link to something we did last year, which was we just wrote some really short blog posts. So that's one of them. I have a bit of a background in blogging, so I wrote a kind of 5 reasons to publish OA kind of thing. So we sort of tried doing that last year. Something we'd really love to do this year is have a panel discussion with some of our researchers, and we had hoped to do that last year, but for various reasons we weren't able to get it put together. But we did have a number of researchers who were quite keen to be part of a panel and actually give their perspective on open access, the read and publish agreements, which I think would be really effective. I think rather than us trying to tell the researchers how good open access is, I think potentially it's more effective for them to hear it from one of them about how they use it in perspective. So I'm really keen for us to do a kind of panel discussion within the university this year as well. Yep, so it's not till October, so I've got a bit more time to think of something shiny. I know some universities do cupcakes. I think one of the Brisbane universities has an open access bike that came out last year for open access week. So close to the time, I'm sure you'll see lots of other ideas coming up.
Okay, and also a feedback to one of your questions in the slides that you presented. Putting outputs in the university repository increases discoverability of their research. So that's a win-win. Right,
Yeah,
next
absolutely.
question for both our speakers is that supporting OA is enormously important and challenging, especially when you have a small team who has many hats to wear and where leadership and professional knowledge at the management levels might be lacking. So how can advocacy bodies like PAL and ALR in Australia support library leadership to step up? And second is, are we arriving at any best practice stands regarding the roles and the structures of professional developments in these areas? So either of you feel free to comment on that.
Do you want to start, Roxanne, as I've talked a lot?
Thanks, Rachel. I thought I'd just cover this and just one other question as well. So there's a question further along about third-party copyright within publications. And I guess I wanted to emphasize that one of the great things about library and publisher partnerships is that the handling of copyright happens in the publishing So we don't have to do that in the library space. So that is brilliant. And for us with Harthy Trust, it was all publications. It was university publications, but we've actually got an ecosystem where we can weld those things together. I think this is a really, really good question about how advocacy bodies such as CALL and ALR can support library leadership to step up, and what should we be doing for best practice. And I think part of the opportunity for us is to think of OA, a bit like an octopus, that there's not just one OA. And I think I've seen a maturing in the leadership and the way we discuss it from some of the early stances, which were very much around saying it has to be a particular model and we have to all agree it's going to be one model. And what we've seen is this development of diversity, like direct to open. And I'd love to see library leadership fostering the sorts of discussions that we're seeing here, that might say, well, we don't have to think about this, we should be thinking about some other things. And the big thing for me is discoverability. And I don't think, say we've got 15 authors from 5 different institutions from a journal article, the answer isn't that all those 5 institutions should take a journal article. The answer is we should be looking at discoverability. So I'd really love to see leadership think about what are the big questions for us to think about as a nation, and foster discussions that will help us all to be more effective and efficient.
Right, thank you. We have one more question for Rachel. What kind of collaboration would there be between your team and the digital access team?
Well, that's a good question. So the digital access team look after the institutional repository, Adelaide Research and Scholarship. So they do the kind of practical elements of that. So they do the, approving the deposits. They'll get back to people if there are issues with, their rights retention statement or that kind of thing. And then my team are very much about the outreach and engagement and promotion around open access in general. So we definitely do crossover. And I think the thing that we try and do is maintain communication and collaboration in terms of just the everyday practices. So we have a little open access working group in the library that myself, the digital access manager, the copyright coordinator, and a couple of other people are all on. And that just ensures that we're talking to each other. So, when there's an update in the system that feeds into the repository, it'll be my team who ends up getting the queries from researchers if something looks different or if it's not working. So we just really ensure that communication. But I suppose to sort of break it down, we do the kind of more of the outreach, and often we're the people receiving the queries. And if it's about, the generally OA or requirements for the green route, that would be us that would answer. But if it's about something very kind of practical about putting it in the repository, we would pass it on to the digital access team. And we do collaborate. For example, last year when the open access policy was updated, the guidelines for depositing in the institutional repository were also updated. And that was very much a collaborative effort where the digital access team wrote them, my team fed back on them, and we made sure that we were both sort of thinking in the same way and that we're both happy with them.
All right. One more question came through for Roxanne. Among the 5 ways of making OA, which one would you foresee that would grow significantly in the near future or long term?
Thank you. And thank you, Zisha, for that really, really good question. So I think I have been absolutely astounded at how quickly Read and Publish has been taken up. And I think that, and the direct to open, the partnerships that we have with publishers will be the area that we see extraordinary growth in, while some of the other areas will still remain important, but will probably stay at around the same level that they have been in the past. So absolutely partnerships with publishers, whether it's Read and Publish or direct to open. I think we're just at the beginning of a very long and positive relationship.
All right, thank you. I don't see any questions coming through, and we are actually at the end of our sessions. I do just want to share one contribution that came in from M. I believe he's from Swinburne University of Technology. He has mentioned that there is this repository migration project that they are involved in, where preprints are now going to be a type that they can host in the institutional repository. So this is new, and the end result is that they'll be able to track the researchers' engagement with preprint sharing. So if you want to know more about this project, feel free to contact me and I will hook you up with M from Swinburne. Right. Let me just take a quick look at the chat box. Yeah, I don't see any questions coming through, so I'm going to quickly end it so that you guys, can enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you again to our two speakers for joining us today and every one of you from around the regions. And I hope to see you in our next ALR series. Right. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Lavinia. That was absolutely fabulous. I loved it. Great questions. And Rachel, great presentation.
Yes, thank you. You too. I like the 5 ways. It's a good way to think of it.
Great. That has worked out well for everybody and really interactive, guys. Okay. All right.
Lovely.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right,
Bye.
bye.